The snow fell heavy over Brooklyn that February night, muffling the city's usual symphony of car horns and distant sirens. Inside Romano's family diner on Mulberry Street, the air was thick with the smell of garlic, tomato sauce, and espresso, scents that had soaked into the red vinyl booths and checkered floors over 2 decades of service. Lucia Romano stood behind the counter, her dark hair pinned back with practiced efficiency, her apron pristine despite the dinner rush that had just subsided. At 32, she possessed the kind of beauty that turned heads but didn't beg for attention. Sharp cheekbones, olive skin, and eyes the color of strong coffee that missed nothing. She wiped down the espresso machine with methodical strokes. Listening, she was always listening. At the corner booth, her husband Marco sat with 3 men whose expensive suits couldn't hide what they were. Vinny the Neck Castellano, fat and wheezing, gestured with a half-eaten cannoli. Sal Giordano, thin as a knife and twice as sharp, picked at his teeth with a matchstick. And Tommy Marchesi, young and eager to prove himself, laughed too loud at Vinny's jokes. "The Colombians are pushing into Red Hook," Vinny was saying, his voice a gravelly whisper that somehow carried. "Don Cicero wants it handled quiet. No headlines, capisce?" Marco nodded, his handsome face serious. He'd been a lieutenant in the Cicero family for 8 years, respected, trusted, the kind of soldier who did what needed doing without question. Lucia had fallen in love with his gentleness, the way he kissed their daughter Sophia goodnight, the way he never brought the darkness of his work home. But she wasn't naive. She knew exactly what he was. "I'll take care of it," Marco said. Tuesday night, the warehouse on Columbia Street. Lucia's hands stilled on the espresso machine. Columbia Street. She filed the information away in the growing archive in her mind. Names, places, debts, grudges. Marco thought she wasn't paying attention, that she was just the beautiful wife who ran the diner, kept the books, and warmed his bed. He had no idea she remembered everything. "Your wife makes the best tiramisu in Brooklyn," Tommy said, raising his voice. "Mrs. Romano, you got any left?" Lucia smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "For you, Tommy?" "Always." She cut a generous slice and brought it over, setting it down with graceful precision. As she leaned in, she caught the tail end of Sal's whisper. "Frankie Morello's skimming from the ports. 20 grand at least." She returned to the counter, her heart beating steady, her face serene. Frankie Morello. She added his name to the list. The men finished their coffee and filed out into the snowy night, leaving Marco alone at the booth. He looked tired, lines etched deeper around his eyes than they'd been a year ago. Lucia locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and slid into the booth across from him. "Long night," she said softly. "They're all long nights." Marco reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused. "But I come home to you and Sophia, and it's worth it. Everything I do, Lucia, it's for you two. You know that, right?" "I know," she whispered. And she did. Marco was a good man, trapped in a bad life, doing what his father and grandfather had done before him. The neighborhood demanded loyalty, and the Cicero family owned the neighborhood. "In a few years, I'll have enough saved. We'll get out, move to Long Island, maybe even California. Sophia can go to a good school, be something better than this." He squeezed her hand. "I promise you, Bella." "I promise." Lucia smiled, but something cold had settled in her stomach, a premonition she couldn't name. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home." They lived above the diner, a modest 3-bedroom apartment where Sophia slept surrounded by stuffed animals and dreams of becoming a dancer. Marco checked on their daughter, kissing her forehead gently before joining Lucia in their bedroom. They made love quietly, desperately, as if trying to hold back the future with their bodies. Afterward, Marco fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even. Lucia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe around her. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. The snow kept falling. 3 days later, on a bitter Tuesday afternoon, Lucia stood in the diner's kitchen preparing the evening's sauce. Sophia sat at the counter doing homework, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked through multiplication tables. The radio played Sinatra, and for a moment life felt almost normal. Marco had left an hour earlier, kissing them both goodbye. "I'll be back by 9, he'd said. "Don't wait up if I'm late." At 6:47 p.m., the world shattered. Lucia heard the car pull up outside, too fast, too aggressive. She moved instinctively, stepping into the dining room, just as the window exploded inward in a spray of glass and bullets. She threw herself over Sophia, covering her daughter's small body as the gunfire erupted like thunder, deafening, endless. The smell of cordon and smoke filled the air. Customers screamed. Tables splintered, and then as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Lucia's ears rang in the terrible silence. She checked Sophia frantically, unharmed, terrified, but whole. "Stay down," she commanded, her voice iron. "Don't move." She crawled to the shattered window and looked out into the street. Marco's car was parked at the curb, its driver's side door open. And there, sprawled on the snow-covered sidewalk, his body riddled with bullets, lay her husband. Someone was screaming. It took Lucia a moment to realize the sound was coming from her own throat. She ran into the street, her shoes crunching on broken glass and spent shell casings. Marco's eyes were open, staring at nothing, blood spreading beneath him in a dark pool that steamed in the winter air. She cradled his head in her lap, her hands coming away slick and red. "No, no, no," she sobbed. "Marco, please. Please don't leave me," but he was already gone. His last breath had misted into the cold air before she'd even reached him. The street filled with people, neighbors, cops, paramedics. Someone pulled her away from the body. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone told her Sophia was safe, being looked after by Mrs. Chen from the laundry next door. Detective Frank Morrison, a weathered Irish cop who'd been walking this beat for 20 years, knelt beside her. "Mrs. Romano, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can you tell me what you saw?" "A black car," she heard herself say. 4 men. They wore masks. Did you recognize anything? A voice, a tattoo, anything?" Lucia looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "No," she lied smoothly. Nothing, but she had seen something. In the split second before the window shattered, she'd caught a glimpse of the driver's wrist as he raised his gun. A distinctive tattoo of a scorpion wrapped around an anchor. And she'd heard one of them laugh, a high, nasty sound she'd heard before in the diner. Tommy Marchese's laugh. The wake was held at Benedetti's funeral home, a somber brick building where half of Brooklyn's dead had been mourned over the past 50 years. Marco lay in an open casket, his face reconstructed by the mortician's careful hands, looking almost peaceful in his best suit. Lucia stood beside it in black, receiving mourners with dry eyes and perfect composure that unnerved everyone who saw it. Don Arturo Cicero himself came, a bull of a man in his 60s with iron-grey hair and hands like concrete blocks. "Your husband was like a son to me," he said, taking Lucia's hand in both of his. "A terrible tragedy. The men responsible will be found and dealt with." "You have my word." "Thank you, Don Cicero," Lucia replied, her voice hollow. "Marco loved you like a father. If you need anything at all, you come to me. Your family is our family." He meant it as comfort, as protection, but Lucia heard it for what it was, a leash. She was expected to be the grieving widow, to retreat into mourning, to let the men handle business, to disappear. Vinny the Neck came, sweating despite the February cold. Sal Giordano came, his eyes calculating as they swept over her. And Tommy Marchese came, young and nervous, offering his condolences with a tremor in his voice. Lucia smiled at each of them. She thanked them for coming. She let them kiss her cheek and press cash into her hands, blood money, guilt money. And she remembered, after the burial at Greenwood Cemetery, after the endless parade of mourners had finally left the diner, Lucia sat alone in the kitchen with a bottle of Marco's grappa and a leather-bound ledger she'd kept hidden for 3 years. In it, in her precise handwriting, were the names and secrets of every made man, associate, and connected criminal who'd ever sat in her diner. She'd started keeping it almost as a game, a way to feel less powerless in a world run by violent men. She'd never imagined she'd need it. Now she turned to a fresh page and wrote 4 names: Tommy Marchese, the shooter Sal Giordano, the planner Vini Castellano, the order giver, Frankie Morello. The reason. Marco had been killed because of Frankie Morello's port skimming, she was certain. Marco must have been closing in, and Frankie had struck first. The others had either ordered it or carried it out. Lucia took a long drink of grappa, feeling it burn down her throat. Sophia was asleep upstairs, exhausted from crying. The diner was dark and silent. And in that silence, Lucia Romano made a decision that would paint Brooklyn's streets red. She would destroy them all. Every single one, but she would do it slowly, carefully. The way Marco had taught her to cook, letting the flavors develop, letting the heat build gradually until the pot boiled over and consumed everything. She closed the ledger and walked to the window, looking out at Mulberry Street. The snow had started falling again, covering the bloodstains on the sidewalk. "I promise you, Marco," she whispered to the ghost she could feel standing beside her. "I promise you they'll all pay." Spring came to Brooklyn with the smell of thawing garbage and flowering trees, a rebirth Lucia greeted with cold calculation. She reopened Romano's family diner 6 weeks after the funeral, and the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. Life could return to normal. The widow was behaving herself. They had no idea what she'd been doing in those 6 weeks. Lucia had always been smart, valedictorian of her high school class before Marco swept her off her feet at 19, but she'd let that intelligence hibernate, channeling it into running the diner and raising Sophia. Now she unleashed it with surgical precision. She'd spent the weeks of mourning, calling in favors, rekindling old friendships, and very carefully asking questions. She'd visited her cousin Angela, who worked as a secretary for a shipping company at the Red Hook ports. She'd had coffee with Donna Pellegrino, whose son worked in the DA's office. She'd gone to confession at St. Francis Xavier, where Father Tom had always been a sympathetic ear, and where she knew Tommy Marchese's mother. Mrs. Marchese volunteered every Thursday. People talked to widows. They wanted to comfort them, to help them, to ease their pain. And Lucia let them, absorbing every scrap of information like a sponge. The picture that emerged was exactly what she'd suspected. Frankie Morello had been skimming from the Cicero family's port operations for months. Marco had been assigned to investigate. When he got too close, Frankie had called in a favor from Sal Giordano, who'd orchestrated the hit. Tommy Marchese had been the triggerman, eager to prove himself. And Vinny Castellano had given the unofficial green light, hoping to protect his own skimming operation from Marco's investigation. 4 men, 4 debts to collect, but Lucia knew she couldn't just kill them. She wasn't a soldier, and even if she were, the family would never let a woman, a civilian, take vengeance. She needed to be smarter. She needed to make them destroy themselves. On a warm April evening, Lucia dressed carefully in a black dress that walked the line between mourning and seduction, pinned her hair up to show the elegant line of her neck, and drove to Bensonhurst to a restaurant called Il Gatto Nero, the Black Cat. It was owned by Sal Giordano. She arrived at 7, during the dinner rush, and asked for a table. The hostess, recognizing her, looked uncertain. "Mrs. Romano, does Mr. Giordano know you're here?" "He will soon enough," Lucia said with a sad smile. "I just needed to get out of the house, you understand? Everywhere else reminds me too much of Marco." The girl softened immediately. Of course. Right this way." Lucia was seated at a corner table with a view of the entire restaurant. She ordered linguine alle vongole and a glass of Chianti, and she waited. It took exactly 12 minutes for Sal Giordano to emerge from the kitchen, his sharp eyes finding her immediately. He approached her table, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Romano, this is unexpected. Mr. Giordano." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Would you join me?" Just for a moment he sat, wary as a cat. "I'm surprised to see you here. I needed somewhere I wouldn't be recognized, somewhere I could think." She met his eyes directly. "I've been going through Marco's papers, his debts, his business arrangements. There's so much I didn't know." Something flickered in Sal's expression, interest perhaps, or fear. "Marco was a careful man. I'm sure everything is in order." That's what I thought. Lucia took a sip of wine, her hand perfectly steady. But I found something strange. Payments to someone with the initials FM, $20,000 over 6 months. Do you know who that might be? Sal's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I couldn't say. Strange, isn't it? $20,000, and Marco never mentioned it to me. Never put it in the diner's books. She paused, letting the implications hang in the air. I thought perhaps it was insurance in case something happened to him. A nest egg he was building. But now I'm wondering if it was something else. Something that got him killed. Mrs. Romano, you should be careful asking these questions. The answers might not be what you want to hear. Lucia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm a widow with a daughter to protect, Mr. Giordano. I need to know who killed my husband and why. If you know something, anything, I would be very grateful. The word grateful hung between them, laden with possibility. Sal studied her for a long moment, his mind clearly working through angles and opportunities. Frankie Morello, he said finally. Your husband was investigating him for the family. Frankie got nervous. Did Frankie kill him? Not personally, but he arranged it. Lucia's eyes glistened with tears, real ones drawn from the well of genuine grief she carried. Thank you for telling me. I know it wasn't easy. Sal reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Be careful, Lucia. This world isn't for women. She gave him a tremulous smile. I'm learning that. As she left the restaurant, Lucia allowed herself a small, cold smile. Sal had confirmed what she suspected, and more importantly, he touched her hand in public, in his own restaurant. Rumors would start circulating by morning. Sal Giordano and the widow Romano. She'd just planted the first seed of doubt. Over the next month, Lucia orchestrated a careful ballet of manipulation. She was seen having lunch with Vinnie Castellano at a cafe in Carroll Gardens, leaning close as he spoke, laughing at his jokes. She arranged to accidentally bump into Tommy Marchesi at a grocery store, where she broke down crying, and he, guilt-ridden and stupid, comforted her with clumsy kindness. Each encounter was witnessed. Each touch, each shared confidence, each moment of apparent intimacy was noted by the neighborhood's ever-watchful eyes. The Mafia ran on loyalty and trust, and Lucia was systematically poisoning both. She also began studying. Late at night, after Sophia was asleep, Lucia pored over Marco's hidden papers, ledgers detailing the family's various operations, notes on territory disputes, names of cops on the payroll. She educated herself in the mechanics of Brooklyn's underworld, learning its rhythms and rituals the way she'd once learned recipes from her grandmother. And she made strategic investments. She hired Tony Russo, a former soldier who'd been forced out of the life after a prison stint, to do occasional work around the diner. Tony was bitter, hungry, and exactly the kind of man who could be useful. She cultivated relationships with bookies, loan sharks, and numbers runners who frequented the diner, learning their operations and their vulnerabilities. The diner itself became her fortress and her weapon. She kept it open late, serving coffee and pastries to the night crowd, the criminals, the cops, the in-between people who lived in Brooklyn's shadows. She listened to everything, remembered everything, and slowly, methodically, began to build her own network of informants and allies. In June, she made her first move. Frankie Morello ran his skimming operation through a warehouse on the Red Hook docks, where shipments of designer goods were lost and resold on the black market. Lucia's cousin Angela provided the shipment schedules. Tony Russo provided muscle and connections to a crew of young thieves, eager for a big score. On a foggy Tuesday night, while Frankie was at his mistress's apartment in Bay Ridge, the warehouse was hit. 2 trucks full of stolen merchandise, worth close to $500,000, disappeared into the night. By the time Frankie discovered the theft, the goods had been dispersed through 5 different fences in 3 states. The loss was catastrophic. Worse, Frankie couldn't report it to Don Cicero without admitting his skimming operation. He was trapped, bleeding money, and desperate. 2 weeks later, Frankie Morello tried to rob a jewelry store in Midwood to recoup his losses. A silent alarm was triggered, anonymously tipped off by Lucia to a police contact. Frankie was arrested during the robbery, caught with the tools in his hands, and sentenced to 15 years in state prison, one down. Lucia attended his sentencing, sitting in the back of the courtroom in her black dress. When Frankie's eyes found hers, she smiled, a cold, terrible smile that made him understand everything. His screams as the bailiffs dragged him away echoed through the courthouse. That night, Lucia poured herself a glass of grappa and toasted Marco's photo on the mantel. "One down," she whispered. 3 to go, but she was just getting started. By the time autumn painted Brooklyn in shades of rust and gold, the rumors about Lucia Romano had taken on a life of their own. Some said she was secretly working with the Colombians. Others whispered she'd seduced half the Cicero family's lieutenants. A few claimed she was a witch who'd cursed everyone involved in her husband's death. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. She was a woman who'd learned to play the game better than the men who invented it. Tommy Marchese was her next target, and he would be easy. Guilt had been eating at him since the shooting. He'd taken to drinking heavily, showing up at the diner 2 or 3 times a week, always alone, always nursing a bottle of beer and stealing glances at Lucia when he thought she wasn't looking. On a rainy October night, after closing time, Tommy knocked on the diner's door. Lucia, who'd been expecting him, let him in. "We're closed, Tommy." "I know, He stood dripping on her clean floor, his eyes red-rimmed. "I need to talk to you, Mrs. Romano, please." She studied him for a moment, then gestured to a booth. "Sit down. I'll make coffee." As the espresso machine hissed and gurgled, Tommy sat with his head in his hands. Lucia brought 2 cups and slid into the booth across from him. "What's troubling you?" "Everything." He looked up at her, his young face haggard. "I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see—" He stopped himself. "See what, Tommy?" "Your husband. I see your husband." The words tumbled out in a rush. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Sal said it would be quick, clean. But there were so many bullets, and Marco, he looked right at me before—" Tommy's voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." Lucia's hand tightened on her coffee cup, but her voice remained gentle. "You're saying you were there that night? You killed Marco. I didn't want to. Sal said if I didn't do it, I was out. I'd never make my bones, never be anybody. And Frankie, he said Marco was dirty, that he was skimming from the family. I thought—" He looked at her with desperate eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing. But you weren't." "No." Tommy put his head down on the table. "I'm damned, Mrs. Romano. I'm going straight to hell." Lucia reached across and touched his hair almost tenderly, the way she might comfort Sophia after a nightmare. "Tommy, look at me." He raised his head and she held his gaze. "You want forgiveness? You want absolution?" Her voice was soft as silk, sharp as a razor. "Here's what you're going to do. You're going to write down everything. Who ordered the hit, who planned it, who paid for it. Every detail. And then you're going to leave Brooklyn and never come back. Change your name, start over somewhere far away. Maybe then God will forgive you. And if I don't?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Then I'll make sure everyone knows you killed a made man on false pretenses. Do you know what the family does to soldiers who kill without authorization? They don't just kill you, Tommy. They make an example." Tommy was shaking now. "You'd turn me in?" "I'd do worse than that." Lucia leaned forward, her beautiful face as hard as marble. "I'd make sure your mother knows what you did. Mrs. Marquise at St. Francis Xavier, who lights a candle for you every Sunday. I'd make sure she dies knowing her son is a murderer and a coward. It was a cruel blow, perfectly placed. Tommy's mother was the only person in the world he loved, and Lucia knew it. "I'll write it down," he whispered. "Tonight. I'll bring it to you tomorrow." "Good boy." She stood up. "And Tommy, when you run, run fast and run far. Because if I ever see you in Brooklyn again, confession won't save you." He stumbled out into the rain, and Lucia locked the door behind him. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system. She'd just threatened a made man, extracted a confession, and sent him running. 6 months ago she'd been a housewife. Now she was something else entirely, something dangerous. Tommy kept his word. The next evening, he left a sealed envelope at the diner with Mrs. Chen, then disappeared. Inside was a 5-page confession detailing the conspiracy to murder Marco Romano. Tommy's handwriting was shaky, but the facts were clear and damning. Lucia made 3 copies. One she kept in a safety deposit box. One she sent to Father Tom at St. Francis Xavier, sealed with instructions to open it if anything happened to her or Sophia, and one she held in reserve. A loaded gun she could fire when the moment was right. Tommy's disappearance raised eyebrows in the family. Some said he'd run off with a girl. Others suspected he'd turned informant. But without a body or evidence, the speculation remained just that, speculation, 2 down. But Sal Giordano was watching now. He was too smart, too careful to be taken down with guilt or simple manipulation. Sal had survived 20 years in the life by being paranoid and ruthless in equal measure. He knew something was happening, even if he couldn't quite see the shape of it yet. Lucia felt his attention on her like a physical weight. When she walked down the street, she sensed his eyes following. When she answered the phone, she checked for the telltale click of a wiretap. She varied her routes, changed her patterns, taught Sophia to be aware of strangers. The hunter had become the hunted. In November, Sal made his move. Lucia was closing the diner late one foggy night when Tony Russo burst through the back door, his face ashen. "Mrs. Romano, you need to get out of here, now." "What's wrong?" "Sal's sending people. Tonight. I heard it from Mickey, the bookkeeper. They're coming to scare you, maybe worse." "You've been asking too many questions, making too many waves." Lucia's mind raced. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but she'd hoped for more time. "How long do I have?" "An hour, maybe less. Get Sophia from Mrs. Chen. Take her to my sister in Queens. Here." She handed him the keys to Marco's car and a thick envelope of cash. "Keep her safe, Tony. No matter what happens to me, keep her safe. What are you going to do?" Lucia smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "I'm going to finish what I started." After Tony left with Sophia, Lucia spent 10 minutes making preparations. She called Detective Morrison on his private line and told him she had evidence of police corruption involving the Cicero family. Would he be interested? He would. She'd have it for him by morning. Then she took Tommy's confession, added some carefully curated documents from Marco's papers, and assembled a package that would implicate not just Sal and Vinny, but 6 corrupt cops and city officials in various criminal enterprises. It was dynamite, enough to trigger a major investigation. She was sealing the package when Sal Giordano walked through the front door of the diner, followed by 2 large men Lucia didn't recognize. "Hello? Lucia, Sal, I'm afraid we're closed." "I know." He gestured for his men to wait by the door and slid into a booth. "Sit with me." "Let's talk." Lucia sat, the package hidden behind the counter, her hand inches from the kitchen knife she'd left strategically placed. "You've been busy," Sal said. "Busy asking questions, making friends, stirring up trouble. Frankie's in prison. Tommy's gone. And now you're sitting here in the middle of the night like you're waiting for something. For me, maybe? I'm just a widow trying to run her late husband's business. You're a lot more than that." Sal leaned forward. "You're smart, Lucia. Smarter than Marco, maybe smarter than me. You figured out what happened to your husband, and you want revenge. I understand that. I even respect it. Then you understand why I can't stop. I understand why you think you can't stop." Sal's voice hardened. "But here's what you don't understand. You can't win this game. You're good, but you're one woman against an entire organization. Eventually, you'll make a mistake. And when you do, I'll be there. Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." He stood up. "Go home, Lucia. Take care of your daughter. Let the past stay buried. Because if you keep pushing, if you keep coming after the family, I won't be able to protect you anymore. And there are men in this organization who will do things that make your husband's death look merciful." "Thank you for the warning," Lucia said coldly. "Now get out of my diner." Sal studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're going to get yourself killed." He gestured to his men. and they filed out into the night. Lucia waited until their car disappeared, then grabbed the package and ran. She met Detective Morrison in Prospect Park at dawn, the package changing hands on a bench overlooking the lake. He flipped through it quickly, his eyes widening. Jesus Christ, Lucia. If even half of this is true, it's all true, every word. Can you use it? Can I use it? This is the kind of evidence that ends careers and starts RICO cases. He looked at her. Where did you get this? Does it matter? It might. If this goes to court, you might have to testify. Lucia shook her head. I'm giving you this anonymously. I was never here. You found these documents through your own investigation. Understand? Morrison hesitated, then nodded. Understood. But Lucia, be careful. When this hits, there's going to be fallout. A lot of angry people are going to want to know who leaked. Let them wonder. She stood up. Just promise me one thing, make it count. Make sure the men who killed Marco pay. I promise. Lucia walked away without looking back, disappearing into the morning crowds. The indictments came down like thunder in early December. Federal agents swept through Brooklyn, arresting 14 members of the Cicero crime family on charges ranging from racketeering to murder. Sal Giordano was among them, caught on wiretaps discussing the Marco Romano hit. Vinny Castellano was arrested at his home, his safe full of skimmed money that perfectly matched the amounts detailed in the leaked documents. The neighborhood erupted into chaos. Newspapers screamed headlines about organized crime and corruption. Journalists camped outside the courthouse. And the Cicero family, its leadership decimated, turned on itself in a frenzy of paranoia and recrimination. Lucia watched it all unfold from the diner, serving coffee to FBI agents and reporters with the same serene smile she'd worn for Mafia lieutenants. She was the grieving widow, shocked by these revelations, grateful that justice was finally being served. No one suspected her involvement. She was just a woman, after all. What could she possibly have done? But as the snow fell on Christmas Eve and Brooklyn settled into an uneasy peace, Lucia Romano stood in her apartment looking at Marco's photo and felt something crack inside her chest. She'd won. She'd destroyed the men who killed her husband. She'd brought down a crime family that had terrorized Brooklyn for generations. And yet Marco was still dead. Sophia still had no father. And Lucia's hands were now as bloody as any soldier's. The revenge she'd craved tasted like ashes. On New Year's Day, 1982, Lucia drove to Greenwood Cemetery. The place was deserted, the graves mantled in fresh snow, the silence broken only by the caw of distant crows. She knelt by Marco's headstone, brushing snow from the marble. I did it, she whispered. I made them all pay. Frankie's in prison, Tommy's gone. Sal and Vinny are facing life sentences. The family's broken. You're avenged. The wind stirred the branches overhead. Somewhere in the cemetery a gate creaked, but I don't feel better. I thought I would, but I don't. Tears froze on her cheeks. I became like them, Marco. I lied. I manipulated. I destroyed lives. I sent men to prison, ruined families. Their wives are widows now, too. Their children cry themselves to sleep. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone. I'm so tired. And I'm so scared. Not of them, I can handle them. I'm scared of what I've become. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself anymore. For a long time, Lucia knelt there in the snow, listening to the silence. Then slowly, she stood up. I love you, she said to the headstone. I'll always love you. But I can't keep living in 1981. I can't keep being the woman who did these things. Sophia needs a mother, not a ghost. She turned and walked back to her car, leaving footprints in the virgin snow. The trials stretched through winter and into spring. Sal Giordano took a plea deal, 25 years in exchange for testifying against Vinny Castellano. Vinny, convicted of ordering the Marco Romano hit, received life without parole. The prosecutors celebrated a major victory against organized crime. Lucia attended every day of Vinny's trial, sitting in the gallery in her black dress, a constant reminder of what his crimes had cost. When the verdict was read and Vinny was led away in chains, she allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. But she didn't smile. After the trial, Lucia made a decision. She sold Romano's family diner to a young couple from Bay Ridge who promised to keep the name and the recipes. The neighborhood mourned the loss, but Lucia knew she couldn't stay. Too many ghosts haunted Mulberry Street. Too many memories, both beautiful and terrible. She used the money from the sale, combined with Marco's insurance and her carefully saved nest egg, to buy a small house in Park Slope. It was far enough from the old neighborhood to be a fresh start, close enough that Sophia could still see her friends. It had a garden where roses could grow, large windows that let in light, and no bullet holes in the walls. Lucia enrolled in accounting classes at Brooklyn College. If she was going to build a legitimate life, she needed legitimate skills. She was 33 years old, starting over, learning to be someone other than Marco Romano's wife or the widow who brought down the Cicero family. It wasn't easy. Some nights she woke in a cold sweat, reliving the sound of gunfire. Other nights she dreamed of Sal Giordano's face as he was led away in handcuffs, of Tommy Marchese's guilt-stricken confession, of Frankie Morello screaming in the courtroom. The ghosts of 1981 followed her to Park Slope, whispering in the quiet hours. But Sophia kept her grounded. Her daughter was 9 now, resilient in the way children can be, slowly healing from her father's murder. She took dance classes at the YMCA and dreamed of performing on Broadway someday. When she pirouetted through their new house, laughing, Lucia remembered why she'd survived, why she'd fought, not just for revenge, for this, for Sophia's future. In June, on what would have been her 10th wedding anniversary, Lucia received an unexpected visitor. She was in the garden, coaxing tomato plants into bloom, when the doorbell rang. Sophia answered it and called out, "Mom, there's someone here to see you." Lucia walked to the front door, wiping dirt from her hands, and froze. Don Arturo Cicero stood on her porch. He'd aged considerably in the past year and a half. His iron-grey hair had gone white. His bullish frame seemed diminished, and he leaned heavily on a cane. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. "Mrs. Romano," he said quietly. "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door, but curiosity and a strange sense of inevitability made her step aside. "Sophia, go to your room and do your homework." Her daughter looked between them, sensing the tension, then obeyed. Lucia led Don Cicero to the living room. They sat across from each other, two enemies observing the formalities. "You've done well for yourself," the Don said, looking around the modest but comfortable house. "Far from Mulberry Street. That was the idea. I know what you did." His voice was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. "It took me a while to piece it together. I'm old, and I wasn't looking in the right places. But eventually I saw the pattern. Frankie's fall, Tommy's disappearance, the documents that appeared just when they'd hurt the family most. You orchestrated all of it." Lucia met his gaze steadily. "And yet you're here alone without your soldiers. Why is that?" "Because I'm impressed." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "My son, not by blood, but the closest thing I had, was murdered by men in my own organization, men I trusted. They betrayed me, and you exposed them for it. In a strange way, Mrs. Romano, you did me a service. I didn't do it for you. I know. You did it for Marco, for yourself, for your daughter. But the result is the same. The rot in my family has been cut out. Sal and Vinny are gone. The family is smaller now, weaker but cleaner. Why are you telling me this?" Don Cicero leaned forward, his cane creaking. "Because I wanted you to know that your debt is paid. Marco's death has been avenged. The men responsible are suffering. And because I wanted to warn you, it's over now. No more moves against my family. No more manipulation, no more revenge. You've won your war, Lucia. Don't make me fight a new one." "I'm done," Lucia said quietly. "I got what I needed. I have no interest in your family anymore." "Good." He stood up slowly, painfully. "Then we understand each other. You stay in your world, I stay in mine. Your daughter grows up safe, goes to her dance classes, becomes something better than all of us. That's what Marco would have wanted." Lucia walked him to the door. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned back. "He was a good man, your husband. one of the best I knew. The world we live in, it devours good men. It devoured him, and it very nearly devoured you. His eyes were sad now, heavy with the weight of decades in a brutal life. I'm glad you got out before it finished the job. So am I, Lucia whispered. She watched him drive away in a black sedan, the last remnant of a war she'd fought and won at terrible cost. Then she closed the door and went to find Sophia. The summer passed quietly. Lucia threw herself into her studies, discovering she had a talent for numbers and analysis, skills she'd honed in the darkness of revenge, now repurposed for legitimate ends. She made friends at college, normal people who knew nothing of her past, who saw only a young widow working to build a better life. She started dating in the fall. Nothing serious, just coffee with a divorced accountant named Robert, dinners with a librarian named James, men who were kind and boring and safe, men who would never put bullets in a window or blood on a sidewalk, men who were nothing like Marco. She tried not to compare them to her late husband, but it was impossible. Marco had been fire and passion and danger wrapped in gentle hands. These men were steady rain, reliable and forgettable. Perhaps that was what she needed now. Perhaps that was all she could handle. On Halloween, Sophia dressed as a ballerina and went trick-or-treating with friends. Lucia sat on the porch handing out candy, watching children run through the streets in costumes, their laughter echoing in the autumn air. It was such a normal scene, such an ordinary life. A year and a half ago, she'd been orchestrating the downfall of made men. Now she was worrying about whether she'd bought enough Milky Ways. The transformation felt surreal. As the evening wound down and Sophia returned home with a pillowcase full of candy, Lucia helped her daughter sort through the haul. Sophia chatted happily about her friends, about dance class, about a boy in her grade who'd said she was pretty. "Mom," Sophia said suddenly, her voice going quiet. "Do you still miss Dad?" Lucia set down the Snickers bar she'd been examining. "Every day, sweetheart. Every single day. Me too." Sophia leaned against her mother's shoulder. "But I'm glad we moved here. I like our new house. And I like that you smile more now." "I smile more?" "Yeah, you used to look sad all the time, even when you were pretending to be happy. But now it's real sometimes." Lucia hugged her daughter tightly, tears pricking her eyes. Children saw things adults thought they'd hidden. Sophia had been watching her mother's journey from grief to rage to... what? Not quite peace, but perhaps the beginning of it. "I love you," Lucia whispered. "More than anything in this world. I love you too, Mom." They sat together on the couch, eating stolen candy and watching a monster movie on TV, just a mother and daughter on Halloween night. No vendettas, no violence, no ghosts from 1981, just life. Normal, precious, hard-won life. Winter came again, and with it the anniversary of Marco's death. Lucia took Sophia to Greenwood Cemetery on a grey February morning. They laid roses on the grave, red for love, white for peace. "Tell me about Dad," Sophia said. "The good stuff. Not how he died. Tell me who he was," so Lucia did. She told Sophia about how Marco had courted her, bringing flowers to her father's hardware store every day for a month until she agreed to have dinner with him. She told her about their wedding at St. Francis Xavier, how Marco had cried when he saw her in her dress. She told her about the night Sophia was born, how Marco had held his daughter and sworn he'd give her the world. She told Sophia the truth, that Marco had been a complicated man, a good father trapped in a bad life, someone who'd made mistakes but loved fiercely. She didn't sanitize or sanctify him. She gave her daughter the real Marco, flaws and all. "He would be so proud of you," Lucia said, brushing snow from Sophia's hair. "He wanted you to be better than us, to have choices we never had. You're doing that, baby. You're becoming exactly who he hoped you'd be. What about you, Mom?" "Who are you becoming?" Lucia considered the question. A year ago, she'd been consumed by vengeance, transformed into something hard and dangerous and barely human. She'd manipulated, threatened, and destroyed without mercy. She'd become in many ways the very thing she'd hated, but she was changing. Slowly, painfully, she was finding her way back to something resembling the woman she'd been before the bullets shattered her world. Not the same woman, that person was gone forever, but someone new. Someone who could live with what she'd done and still look her daughter in the eye. "I'm becoming your mother," Lucia said finally. "That's who I want to be. Not the widow, not the woman who brought down the Cicero family. Just your mom." Sophia hugged her tightly. "That's all I need you to be." They stood together at Marco's grave for a few more minutes, then walked back to the car. As they drove through Brooklyn's streets, Lucia noticed how the neighborhood was changing. New shops were opening, young families moving in, the old mob haunts becoming coffee shops and bookstores. The world was moving on. Maybe she could too. On Valentine's Day, Detective Frank Morrison called her. He'd officially retired from the force the month before, but they'd stayed in occasional contact. He'd been one of the few people who knew, or at least strongly suspected, what Lucia had done, and he'd looked the other way because, in his words, "Sometimes justice needs a little help. Lucia, I thought you should know. Sal Giordano was found dead in his cell this morning. Suicide, officially. Hung himself with a bedsheet." Lucia closed her eyes. She felt nothing, no satisfaction, no regret, just a vast emptiness where the rage used to live. "Thank you for telling me. There's something else. Before he died, he wrote a letter. Asked that it be sent to you. What does it say?" "I don't know. It's sealed. I can bring it by if you want." "No," Lucia said quickly. "Burn it. I don't want to read it." "You sure?" "I'm sure. Whatever Sal wanted to say, I don't need to hear it. That chapter of my life is closed." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, Lucia, I think you made the right choice. Getting out, moving on. Most people who go down the road you went down, they don't come back. They let the darkness eat them alive. But you fought your way back to the light. That takes real strength. I didn't have a choice. Sophia needed me. Maybe, or maybe you're stronger than you think." He paused. "Take care of yourself, Lucia. You and that little girl of yours. We will. Goodbye, Frank." She hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen of her park slope house, looking out the window at the garden where spring flowers would soon bloom. Sal was dead. Vinny was serving life. Tommy was gone, disappeared into whatever new identity he'd built for himself. Frankie would rot in prison for another decade at least. The men who killed Marco had all paid the price, and Lucia Romano was still standing, still breathing, still fighting to build something good from the ashes of 1981. She thought about the letter she'd refused to read, wondered briefly what Sal might have written. An apology? A threat? A confession? It didn't matter. She'd meant what she told Morrison. That chapter was closed. She wouldn't let Sal Giordano haunt her from beyond the grave. The ghosts of 1981 had taken enough from her. They didn't get to take anything more. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and warm rain, and with it a kind of peace Lucia hadn't felt in 2 years. She finished her first year at Brooklyn College with straight A's. Sophia's dance recital was a triumph, her daughter spinning across the stage with such grace and joy that Lucia wept in the audience. Robert the accountant proposed over dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant, and Lucia gently turned him down. She wasn't ready, might never be ready, but she thanked him for understanding. She began volunteering at a shelter for domestic violence victims, helping women who'd survived their own wars find their footing in the aftermath. She understood their nightmares, their rage, their guilt. She'd lived it herself, and in helping them, she found a purpose beyond revenge, beyond survival. One warm May evening, Lucia sat in her garden as the sun set over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Sophia was at a friend's house, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing. She poured herself a small glass of grappa, Marco's favorite, and raised it to the darkening sky. "I did it," she said softly to the ghost she sometimes still felt beside her. "I made them pay, and I survived it. Sophia's safe. We have a good life. I'm becoming someone again, not just the widow, not just the woman consumed by vengeance. Someone whole. The breeze stirred the roses, carrying their scent through the garden. I hope you're proud of me. I hope you understand why I did what I did. And I hope, her voice caught, I hope you can forgive me for the things I became, the lines I crossed. I did it for you, but also for me and for Sophia. I did it because I couldn't let them win. Because I couldn't let your death mean nothing. She drank the grappa, feeling it burn warm down her throat, and closed her eyes. I'll always love you, Marco Romano. But I'm letting you go now. I'm letting 1981 go. Because Sophia needs a mother who can live in the present, not the past. And I need to be more than what they made me. More than what I made myself. When she opened her eyes, the sky had deepened to purple, and stars were beginning to appear. The city lights of Brooklyn glittered in the distance. 1,000,000 lives being lived, 1,000,000 stories unfolding. Her story was just one among them. Tragic and violent and ultimately human, she'd been the Mafia widow who made every man pay for her husband's death. She'd been the hunter, the manipulator, the architect of destruction. She'd walked through darkness so complete it had threatened to consume her soul. But she'd emerged on the other side, scarred, changed, but alive. And that, perhaps, was its own kind of victory. Lucia Romano stood up, brushed off her dress, and walked back into her house. Tomorrow she had classes, work at the shelter, dinner to make for Sophia. Tomorrow was life, with all its ordinary demands and extraordinary possibilities. The ghosts of 1981 would always be there, lurking in the shadows of her memory. But they didn't own her anymore. She'd paid her debts, exacted her justice, and found her way back to something resembling grace. It would have to be enough, and perhaps, in the end, it was.